Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you this morning. Got a beautiful Lord's Day, and it was a great blessing to be together, especially for this time of Bible study as we seek to learn more about our Lord Jesus by studying his life as recorded in the Gospel of Luke. And so we are in Luke. We're in chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. Now, last week we read a paragraph that begins in verse 27, but I want to restart that. So we talked about the first part of it, but we didn't get done. Luke 6:27. Let's begin there. Luke 6:27. But I say unto you which hear, love your enemies, do good to them that hate you, bless them that curse you, and pray for them which despitefully use you. And unto him that smiteth thee on the one cheek, offer also the other, and him that taketh away thy cloak, forbid not to take thy coat also. Give to every man that asketh thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. And as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. For if ye love them which love you, what thank have you? For sinners also love those that love them. And if ye do good to them which do good to you, what thank have ye? For sinners also do even the same. And if ye lend to them if you lend to them of whom ye hope to receive, what thank have ye? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again. But love your enemies and do good and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest. For he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. All right, that's a little bit longer reading. We talked about the first part of that, and I'm not going to repeat all of that about loving your enemies, doing good to them, praying for them. We talked last week about what a really hard, tough assignment that is. I think very tough assignment. But we're ready to pick up at verse 30, really, verse 30. Give to every man that asketh thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. Now, here's sort of a dilemma. If anybody comes up to me and asks, Clayton, give me $100. Am I duty bound by that to do that? Here's a guy who won't work on the street. I mean, he is in the predicament he's in because he has opportunity to provide for himself, but he won't, and he's just lazy. He's just a bum. But he wants me to give him $1,000. Am I obligated to give that to him because of what Jesus says to him? Give to every man that asketh thee. Well, I think the answer to that's no. And I think the reason we have to come to that conclusion is because in this context, he's talking about oppressors. He's talking about people who oppress us. Starting at 27, your enemies, those who despitefully use you and persecute you, those who would taunt you, we mentioned in verse 29. So I think verse 30 is in that immediate context where, oppressors are trying to force an issue. They're trying to take things from us that they don't have a right to take. And Jesus is basically saying what he has already been saying in the context. Do not resist those who would oppress you for righteousness' sake. I really think that's the context of this. We have to be able to harmonize this with passages like 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10. I think you know that verse very well. 2 Thessalonians 3:10 says, when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. And so there's other Bible teaching that says we should not enable those who are unwilling to work and provide for themselves, right? So this has to be, our statement in our text this morning has to be qualified when it says, give to every man that asketh you. Well, wait a minute. Paul said in 2 Thessalonians 3:10 not to give to the guy who won't work. If he won't work, he shouldn't eat. I shouldn't enable him. I shouldn't give him. I shouldn't keep him in that activity. So this has to be qualified, and I think the qualifier here is the context, and the context is talking about oppressors. So the government comes after us because of our religious faith. and they want to take things from us. Maybe they want to, oh, you can't even imagine what it might be. Maybe they want to confiscate your property because you're a Christian. And Jesus is saying here, don't resist those who would oppress us in that fashion. Don't be provoked into fighting. That's what verse 29 clearly was talking about, as we discussed last week. Don't let them provoke you into a fight. So I think that's the context. Tom?
He's talking to us as Christians. We should know what our brothers and sisters need, right? And we're not doing a brother justice if we are abetting him not working when he could be and providing for it. And there's that difference between him not able to work or some hard times are just there upon things. We see the saints in, the first century there was a famine in the land, there was, other things and they were taught to, give and take care of those things. But you separate those two types of categories in it. That guy that he has the ability and he refuses, and he's a Christian. He should know better that he should be out doing work.
Okay. Yeah, the scriptures certainly have a lot to say about being benevolent. We need to be a benevolent people, no doubt about that. But we can't enable the person who won't work. And I believe we're all clear on that. I don't think that's in this context. I don't think this is talking about the needy person. I think who's asking for something. I think this is describing the oppressor. Notice even the second half of verse 30, of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. And so I really think that phrase, the first phrase of verse 30, sandwiched between verse 29 and the end of verse 30, I think it's talking about oppression. I think it's talking about oppressors. Don't let oppressors provoke you into reaction. Really, don't let your enemies. This whole paragraph started out describing your enemies. So your enemies, your oppressors. This is talking about how you react to them. This is not talking about men in general. This is not talking about benevolent situations. This is not talking about a situation where there's a guy who won't work to feed himself. This is talking about enemies and oppressors. And I think we have to understand that phrase in verse 30 in that context, okay? Now, if we're clear, I think that's right. I think that has to be the right conclusion. I really think that's the only way we can harmonize this with other scriptural teaching. Mike?
Proverbs 3:27, it says, withhold not thy good from them to whom it is due. So there are some people it's due, but there's a lot of people who it isn't due.
Yeah.
So we're not out here to just give money to somebody just say out on the street. I've met people out there on the street in a strange, just a total stranger. I don't know if they need money or not.
Yeah.
It's not my duty to give that person money just because they say they need it.
Well, it's hard to make that call sometimes. I do think, now I want to really be clear on this, I do think that we are taught to be a benevolently minded people. We ought to be kind to those who are legitimately in need. Like Mike says, though, a lot of times the people who are asking are not in need, or the people who are asking, we can't even detect whether they're in need or not. But in regards to needy people, and I don't think I'll go out on take it a step further and say I don't think we do enough of that. I don't think as individual Christians we are as careful to be benevolent as we ought to be. It's a hard call. It's a tough judgment. I don't think this passage is talking about benevolence at all. That's not in this context, and so that's a whole separate discussion. Tom?
You get down to the next few verses, it starts leading into a benevolent situation because it talks about lending.
Yeah.
You lend people to expect back.
Yeah.
And the sinners do the same thing. You make a comparison. But there are times when, I see a brother in need or somebody in need, and here, take this. I'll pay you back. You're not looking for it to get paid. If it gets paid back, that's great. But you're doing it not looking to get it returned to you.
Yeah.
And there's times that we have situations like that come up. And we should be willing to do those type of things. And I think that's what Jesus is talking about here as well. And he moves from that, that oppressing type thing to a more, look for a need that, when you can lend money to people and not expect a return to it.
I think you're right.
And it uses that word lend, it's there, no, you're doing them a favor, you're giving something that they need. It could be on a temporary situation. They might pay you back, they might not, but you're not looking to get paid back.
Okay, let's move into that section of this then, as Tom has described it there. First of all, verse 31 obviously is Luke's account of the so-called golden rule. As you would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. You know, what an amazing and worthy, simple principle. That if everybody lived by that, this world would be a true utopia if everybody lived that way. In other words, this is the way I would like to be treated. So I'm going to treat you that way. But we don't do that, do we? Now, if you've treated me nice, I might treat you nice in return. In other words, if we've got a friendly sharing relationship, I might share back with you if you share with me, but it's tit for tat. That's not what Jesus is talking about. So here's a guy, and I want him to treat me decently. I want him to treat me kindly. I want him to be gentle, a gentle person. Well, wait a minute, but he's not. He's not that kind of person. But I'm supposed to be anyway, right? I don't treat him like he treats me. That's not the standard. I treat him like I want him to treat me. Man, what a high bar that is. That is a really high bar when you stop to consider it. But again, as in all the principles that are set forth in the Word of God, it's in our best interest. If we lived that way, we would be so much better off. Thoughts or comments here, anybody? Mike?
Well, I think you can hang the whole law of prophets on that one scripture, if I'm not mistaken. So the truth of the matter is, nobody does that.
Yeah, love thy neighbor as thyself.
Even though we should do it. But
So, this is an area where we can continually try to improve ourselves, right? You're never going to be able to say, I got that. I've perfected that. I don't even have to think about that anymore. I've got that all. No, this is an area where we can keep growing. All right. Now, he goes on to say that if you only are good to those who are good to you, you really have not moved the needle, right? You haven't improved on the situation of mankind if all you're doing is doing good to those that do good to you, or do good to those that you expect maybe they would return good to you. So if you love them that love you, what thank have you? For sinners also love those that love them. He's not saying it's bad to love those who love you. I love Cindy. She loves me. Should I stop loving Cindy because she loves me? I mean, no. That's a good thing, right? Loving those who love you is a good thing. That's nothing. He's not saying that's bad, but he is saying that's not the challenge. That's not the big challenge of life, to love those who love you. The challenge is to love those who don't love you and who don't treat you right. And so I think he's still in that mode of how to deal with enemies, how to deal with oppressors. If you love them that love you, what thank have you? For sinners also love those that love them. If you do good to them which do good to you, what thank have you? For sinners also do the same, right? You have not done a high, noble, worthy act if you simply are doing good to those who do good to you. Now that's a nice thing to do. It's wonderful, and I see that a lot among our brethren. We help each other. This guy does something good for that guy, and that guy does something good for that guy, and that's all very, very wonderful. But it's not the test. It's not the test that Jesus is putting forward in this context. In this context, he's talking about your enemies, those who oppress you, those who do evil. Even to people who are not good to me, I'm supposed to be good to them. I'm telling you, Jesus is really calling us to a higher level here. This does not come naturally, right? And he says the same thing in verse 34 in regards to lending. If you lend to them who hope to, of whom you hope to receive, what thank have you for sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much again? Again, he's just saying, and it's not bad. Again, it's not. He's not condemning lending to them that you hope to receive from. Again, in the vein of doing good to others, in the sense that they'll probably do good to you in return. It's not bad. It's not a bad thing. But it's not the test. But notice I think verse 35 ties this all back together. But love your enemies. Well, wait a minute. This whole context started out in verse 27 with love your enemies, right? So we got kind of like bookends here in this paragraph. And I believe we have to understand everything in between the bookends to be talking about the same thing. He's talking about your enemies, how you react to your enemies, how you treat those who don't treat you good. That's this context. And I think everything in between there has to be understood in that fashion. Verse 35, love your enemies, do good, lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and you shall be the children of the highest, for he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. Oh, there's the thing, right? If you can work on perfecting this, you will become more and more like God himself. Because in Matthew's account, Matthew says he sends his rain on the just and the unjust. Luke says he is kind to the unthankful and to the evil. There's people right here in our immediate community who never give a single thought to God. They don't care about God. They don't do anything about serving God. In fact, they are actually pretty terrible people. They're mean and evil and wicked, and they still get benefits from God. God still does good to them. And so he's saying, to the extent that we are able to move ourselves in the direction of doing good, even to those who are enemies, who would mistreat us, if we can improve ourselves in doing good toward them, we just become more like the Father. The reward, by the way, in verse 35, great is your reward in heaven. Your reward shall be great. You shall be called the children of the highest. This guy, he's not a very nice guy, but I tried to help him out. And it ended up, have you ever been in that situation where you tried to help somebody out, it ends up costing you a bunch of money because you sort of went out on a limb to help them, and it ended up costing you a bunch of money, and you're never going to get that back. And I'm never going to ever get that back. Yeah, I will. In a way. Not the same way, but I'll be rewarded by God for conducting myself like this text says. Tom?
Jesus is providing a lot of wisdom there. It's sort of human nature for when you are oppressed or mistreated in some way, you want to retaliate.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there's evil people out there that are doing that, provoking that, they're looking to gain something. If they can provoke you, then they get you to do something, and they turn around and claim that, well, no, he did that. We see all these gunfight shows back when I was growing up. And that was sort of, the evil guy sort of did that. He took this good guy that didn't know how to shoot or anything and provoke him, give him a gun, and he was sort of forced to draw on him to do it. And what happened? He got killed. And, we see where
these young kids don't know anything about those old westerns.
That was sort of that concept. If you turned around and you gave what they wanted, you didn't get that confrontation.
Yeah, right.
There's going to be evil people, even if you don't.
They are.
They're going to do evil to you.
That's right. That's right. All right. Are we clear on that, Clayton?
I was just thinking about it from the opposite perspective. Any time that I've got into a dispute with somebody and I was the aggressor, if they replied back kindly, like, well, it's okay, I hope you have a blessed day. Boy, that diffuses you.
That does. It really does, doesn't it? Yeah, good point. All right. Okay. I think that's really a powerful passage. I would challenge you this week, go back and reread that and just meditate on it for a little while and see if that doesn't help you be a better person. That's what Jesus is asking us to do. All right, let's continue at verse 36. I'm in Luke 6, verse 36. Be ye therefore merciful, as your Father also is merciful. Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven. given it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, shall men give into your bosom. For with the same measure that you meet, withal it shall be measured to you again. And he spake a parable unto them, can the blind lead blind? Shall they not both fall into the ditch? The disciple is not above his master, but everyone that is perfect shall be as his master. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but perceivest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Either how canst thou say to thy brother, Brother, let me pull out the mote that is in thine eye, when thou thyself beholdest not the beam that is in thine own eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, then shalt thou see clearly to pull out the mote that is in thy brother's eye. Okay, so be merciful. How do you define mercy? If you were called upon to give a definition of mercy, how would you define mercy? Well, I've always liked the very simple definitions of mercy and grace. Grace is when you get what you don't deserve. So we are the recipients of God's grace, and we don't deserve all the things that He blesses us with, especially spiritual blessings by God's grace. We are so undeserving. So grace is when you get what you don't deserve. Mercy is when you don't get what you do deserve. Now that may be an oversimplification, but I think it's a pretty neat way to think about it. So mercy is so God is merciful. So He's asking me to be merciful. God is merciful. God does not give me what I deserve, right? He's made it possible for me to avoid receiving what I deserve. But God is merciful. He does not give me what I should be getting, what I deserve to get. And He's asking us to be merciful. And so there's Eric, and Eric really did me dirty the other day. And, boy, I'd like to get even with him. That rascal, I'd just like to put it on him. But if I'm merciful, then Eric really deserves a punch in the nose for what he did to me. But if I'm merciful, then I don't give him the punch in the nose, right? That's what God is calling us to do here, right? By the way, Eric didn't do me wrong the other day. I was just using him as an example, but you get the point. So I'm the recipient of God's mercy when I don't get what I deserve. I am merciful to others when I don't give them what they deserve. Now notice that there's a clear implication. They deserve it, but if I'm merciful, I don't give them what they deserve in retribution for how they've treated me. Okay? Monty?
He says, be merciful even as the Father's merciful. It even goes beyond that. It's not that I'm just not going to punch Eric in the nose, but I'm probably going to shake hands with him and hug him too.
Yeah.
Because when we think of God's mercy, what we deserved was to die and go to hell. And what we got was somebody else paid that what was deserved. Jesus paid the price for us, and then if we'll be faithful to Him, give us a huge reward on top of that. And so when we think about being merciful as the Father, it's not that we're just not getting even, but we're going to continue to do good for whoever in spite of the way they treat us.
Okay. All right. Tom?
Can't help but think of the unmerciful servant parable that Jesus told.
He received mercy and then wouldn't share it with somebody else.
Yeah, and just and we've got to watch that we don't fall into that situation because we're sort of in that. We had that debt that couldn't be paid and it was forgiven, and then we go out and we treat our fellow man and it's like they owe us pennies, but we're gonna throw the taskmaster out.
Yeah. JD?
Just thinking about the concept of God's mercy, if you talk to people out in the world, they'll talk about the whole concept of hell, would mean that God is not merciful. But when you really think about it, God is very merciful in the fact that He's long-suffering, because we really deserve to be struck dead the first time that we sin. But instead, none of us know, if we have today, tomorrow, or whatever, but for some undetermined length of time that we have, then we have a right to, not that we should, but we could live our whole lives being completely terrible, and we still have that chance to make it right.
I think you're right. That's exactly right. Wayne?
There's a setting in the Civil War that kind of illustrates, I think, what mercy is, and that is there's two opposing sides, the North and the South. A Southerner who is fighting against the north came home, and the general came and saw the man and was going to kill him as an enemy. And his mother pled for him and says, please give him mercy. And the general says, he doesn't deserve mercy, he's the enemy. And the mother replied, if he deserved it, it wouldn't be mercy.
Yeah, exactly right. Good point. All right. So you obviously recognize Luke's parallel to Matthew is the one we more commonly reference on this statement, verse 37. Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. Forgive, and ye shall be forgiven. That's the parallel to Matthew 7, verse 1. Judge not that you be not judged, right? Now, that concept is very likely the most misused notion in anything that Jesus taught. I mean, false teachers have misused the words of Jesus in uncountable ways. But they sure have latched onto this, right? People of the world who don't know anything about the Bible and who couldn't find that statement in the Scriptures if their life depended on it, will quote Matthew 7, verse 1, judge not that you be not judged. And of course, this is Luke's almost exact parallel to it. Condemn not, you shall not be condemned. Forgive, it shall be forgiven. Now, I want you to kind of make verses 38 and 39 sort of a parenthetical there. Hold that. Actually, including verse 40, and skip down to 41, because in 37 and 41 and 42 really go together, don't they? I mean, and you see, maybe you see them connected a little more clearly in Matthew 7 than here. But judge not that you be not judged. And then what kind of judging does he have in mind here? Well, it's the kind of hypocritical and hypercritical kind of judging that he describes here. And you know, we've talked about it so many times. You see, I mean, what a graphic picture. You know, a guy with a literal beam sticking out of his eye. Well, obviously, that's hyperbole, right? That's intended for exaggerated purposes. Here's a guy with a literal beam sticking out of his eye, and he's trying to go to a fellow there beside him who has a mote. We don't use the word mote. Newer versions will say he's got a speck in his eye. So a guy with a huge beam sticking out of his eye is trying to get a speck out of someone else's eye. It's just so ridiculous. I mean, Jesus intended that to be a word picture that just shows extreme ridiculousness. That would never happen in real world activities, right? You just wouldn't do that. It's just ridiculous. You would take care of your own problem. You get that beam out of your eye before you try to do anything else with the other guy. But notice what I think is interesting here is and same thing in Matthew 7. At the end of verse 42, after you get the beam out of your eye, then shalt thou see clearly to pull out the mote out of thy brother's eye. He doesn't say ignore that. So your brother has this much lesser problem. You got the big problem. You got the beam, he's got the speck. He's not saying ignore your brother, the speck in your brother's eye. Don't ignore that he needs some help too. He's saying take care of your own issue first. Then, after you've gotten the beam out of your eye, you will... Now, think about how that relates to the instruction, judge not that you be not judged. Well, wait a minute. If I'm trying to pick the speck out of his eye, now I've got the beam out of mine, and now I'm moving on, and I'm trying to get the speck out of his eye. That clearly implies judging, doesn't it? I am making some judgment there. He's got a problem. I want to help him with his problem. I'm making some judgment in regards to my brother with the speck in his eye. But I'm not being the huge hypocrite here, wherein I ignore my own issues and focus on his. I think that's the point of this. Even the very instruction itself shows that he's not forbidding all judging. He's forbidding hypocritical and hypercritical kinds of judging. Monty?
I think a big problem we have with this passage in the one in Matthew is that we don't really understand how typically the Scriptures use the word judge or judgment. When the Lord comes in judgment, or we see the judgments that God sent on the nation of Israel, it wasn't a coming to decide whether they was doing right or wrong. He's not condemning the deciding whether someone's doing right or wrong. He's talking about passing condemnation and punishment, because he goes on in the verse here, when he says, judge not, he also says, condemn not. So what he's saying here is, don't pass judgment and punish somebody when you've got a worse problem yourself. Don't be hypocritical about it. But typically, with the way the world uses it, when people say, oh, the Bible says judge not, they're talking about don't form an opinion about something. That's not what he's talking about. He's not talking about forming an opinion or determining whether somebody's doing right or wrong. He's talking about condemnation and punishment.
Okay, I think that's a good point. You probably have this in your margin already, maybe at Matthew 7. Perhaps you should put it here in our text in Luke 6 as well. But the verse that you have to harmonize with this is John 7:42. John 7:42, judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment. So that's actually a command, right? We're actually commanded to judge there. So again, this statement has to be understood and modified by the immediate context and the broader context of the Scripture. Wayne?
Yeah, if you go back to Matthew 7, it really clears it up. Nobody ever quotes verse 2. Everybody quotes verse 1.
Yeah.
But verse 2 says, for in the way that you judge. So he is saying in verse 2 that you are going to judge. But in that judgment, be careful, because you're going to be judged just like you judge.
Yeah.
So he's even in that passage saying that we are going to make judgments.
Yeah.
Just make sure the judgments that we make are, like he says in John 7, righteous judgments.
Exactly right. Yeah. Tom?
Big problem the world makes a lot of times is they don't realize that God has already judged them. And sometimes we are not judging, not so much judging them, we're telling them that God has said, you're not supposed to do this. But they don't want to hear it from us because they see us as in sort of a similar or worse situation they are. So basically, Jesus is going through and trying to put yourself in the situation so when you speak as I'm speaking to you, that it comes as from God that's doing the judgment, not from you. And that's the problem the world has with. The world does not want to be told that they're sinners.
Yeah.
They want to be comfortable in their situation. And when you go through and you see social media and other things, or you're just talking to people in general in the world, well, what right do you have to say that to me? Well, it's not so much my right, it's what God has best for you. If I'm really concerned about you, I don't want to go, I'm going to tell you what God tells you to do. But I need to say, not be hypocritical and trying to, go through the problem. Like with the Pharisees and a lot of the Jewish leaders and things, they came through, they had their laws that they tried to put on people and judge according to their laws. And they weren't justified because those laws weren't in harmony with God. But when we're in the harmony with God, we've got God's judgment that we're really informing people about. A lot of people don't want to receive God's judgment.
Okay. Anybody else? Any thoughts on it? All right, let's catch those parenthetical verses that I asked you to hold for a minute. Given it shall be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, verse 38, and shaken together and running over, shall men give into your bosom, for with the same measure that you meet, withal it shall be measured to you. So, again, he just sort of steps back again into the vein of doing good to others. I would argue that verse 38 is in the mode of a proverb. It's not always true that if you give, it'll be given to you. If you do good to others, they'll overflowingly give good to you. That's not always true, but it's most often true. If we're good and kind and generous, we'll receive that same kind of treatment from other people. Not from everybody probably, but from from other good people. If we do that kind of good, other good people will treat us in the same way. In the same measure that you meet, with all it shall be measured to you again. Now, I think this goes to the point that Wayne was making a minute ago. In the parallel in Matthew 7, at verse 2, and so you could say that actually It's worded quite a lot differently here. But you could say that, as Wayne was pointing out in Matthew 7, verse 2, with what judgment you judge, you shall be judged. And so you could take this verse 38 in that same mode and probably very accurately apply it that way. He's talking about the kind of giving of judgment. And if you give, the kind of judgment you give will be the kind of judgment you get back. So verse 38 used as a standalone would say, give, be generous, and others will treat you back generously. But if you look at it contextually, and I think Wayne makes a really good point here about this, if you compare 37 and 38 to Matthew 7, 1 and 2, then verse 38 would here be understood in the mode of give merciful judgment to others and you will receive merciful judgment in return. So I can go either way. I can take it as sort of a standalone, or I can take it in that kind of explanation as well. Tom?
I go up here to these mulch, all right? They come in, they fluff up the mulch, and they pour a yard of mulch in a bucket on my trailer, all right? Well, it's a yard, but the thing that he's talking about is they pour that bucket, I've got my trailer that will hold that. I get in there and I step on it and push it down and get it all packed in. It might only be a half yard of actual what it is. And the Lord's talking about...
So they actually fluff it up before they put it in?
They fluff it up before they put it in. So if you get on...
I don't like that.
Yeah, and they stuff it down. A yard is 3 by 3 by 3. But when it's packed, it might be 2 yards.
Yeah, you get twice as much if you pack it.
Talking about what you're getting back, you're getting back that.
Well, I'm not going to go up there. If that's the way they treat their customers, I'm not going there.
But every place does it. They go through it. But it's the thing is, but you understand that's a yard of mulch. But the thing that the Lord's talking about here, when he gets that, what you're getting back, you're getting that packed down.
You're not trying
to visually get that yard back. You're getting a true 100% measure of what is there.
Okay, good. All right. Kind of a real simple statement, verse 39. Can the blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into the ditch? I don't tell you, there's an awful lot of that going on in our world today. There's a lot of blind people trying to lead other people, and they are falling in the ditch right and left. We need the perfect guidance of God's word, and people are ignoring it, and in that sense they are blind, and so they're just going off the rails, and they're leading other people that way too. The disciple is not above his master, but everyone that is perfect shall be as his master. Again, think of this. Think of that statement. I really think this still all is sort of in that statement of how we treat others, especially people who are our enemies, people who would be oppressive toward us. The disciple is not above his master, but everyone that is perfect shall be as his master. Perfect in the sense of mature, full grown. He is putting forth some really hard principles in this context. And by the way, this is obviously Luke's parallel to the more familiar statement of these principles is in the Sermon on the Mount recorded in Matthews 5, 6, and 7. And I've told you this before, but when we were in Russia on the second trip we made to Russia, we were able to have some lectures at the Moscow State University. And one of the fellows, for his lecture class, just taught the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. So he's talking to a bunch of young people who were atheists, had been raised atheists. They'd been taught to be atheists. They never knew anything other than that. And I remember him making a point to these young people who were atheists. What if everyone lived like this? And they said, it would be a wonderful world. Man, it'd be a beautiful place if everybody lived like that. And so it is. It's true. And these principles are so high, such a high standard, such a worthy goal to seek to achieve. Any thoughts or comments? All right. So we're just all but out of time. Let's read just a couple more verses here, because I actually think these next verses, you could draw a conclusion relative to our statements about judging. Verse 43, for a good tree bringeth not forth corrupt fruit, neither doth a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. For every tree is known by his fruits. For of thorns men do not gather figs, nor of a bramble bush gather they grapes. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good, and an evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. For of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh. Now stop there for a minute. Wouldn't you agree with me that what he just says there necessitates judging, right? I should be, in other words, especially the idea of good fruits versus bad. I may not know a man's heart. I may not be able to read his heart. God can read hearts. I can't read hearts. But I can see the fruit of his heart. Out of the good, a good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is good. An evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth that which is evil. So, am I allowed to judge fruit? Am I allowed to say that's evil fruit? What that guy's doing is wrong. I can't judge his heart. I can't say, that guy, I know what he's thinking. I know what's in his heart. I know what his methods and means and attitudes are. I can read his mind. I can't read his mind. But I can judge his activities. I can judge his actions. I can see the fruit of what's in his heart because it's manifested in his life. It's visible. It's obvious. And that and those few verses themselves go to this point of judge. I can judge. I can see that. That's not, as Marty says, I can certainly form an opinion about that guy based upon what I see in his life. Thoughts, comments here? Anybody? Well, let's stop right there. That's a good stopping place. We'll pick it up, Lord willing, at verse 46 next week. And we'll see the wrap-up of Luke's account here of the Sermon on the Mount. Thanks, everybody.